Hello, welcome back to the Land of Kekiak. My name is Laurel. Today we are reading in the Eclectic Manual of Methods, and we are starting into the reading chapter. Okay, let's just get into it. Auxiliary studies. There are certain studies intimately connected with reading which should be taught in connection with it from the first. It will therefore be well to consider these briefly and their relation to one another as well as to the reading lesson itself, before taking up details of the reading lesson proper. The four important auxiliary studies to be considered are language lessons, writing, object lessons, and composition and spelling. Language lessons. When the child first comes to school, he knows how to talk. He learned this art by associating certain spoken words with certain objects, attributes, and actions. He imitated the words that he heard and thus in time learned to speak. If he has already heard correct language, his own language will for the most part be correct, and the errors he makes through inexperience or imperfect reasoning can be easily rectified. But the case is different where the child hears the same grammatical blunders and inelegant expressions day after day, at home or on the playground, and naturally imitates them. These errors can be overcome only by patient persistence on the part of the child's instructor. A child of well-educated and refined parents and one whose associates are cultivated persons will probably have but little use for grammar at any time, but such children are the rare exceptions, and the teacher must prepare to battle against great odds. He has only the short time that the child is in school to weigh against the many hours spent by that child under adverse influences. Therefore, there is all the more reason why work in this direction should receive the most watchful attention. Never allow a grammatical blunder to pass uncorrected, either in a child's speech or in his written exercises. Above all, the teacher should be careful about his own language, both as to the choice of words and the form of expression. Do not make the mistake of writing wrong forms on the board or elsewhere for correction by young children. This may be done with profit in advanced classes, but it is best that a beginner should never see a wrong form of word or expression in the schoolroom. Correct all bad English instantly and quietly, but teach only the best, and bear in mind that the best is nearly always the simplest. This instruction in language is of the greatest importance to the child. Just as the twig is bent, the tree's inclined, and a man frequently bears unconsciously through life the marks of his early training. Habits of incorrect speech acquired in childhood become a part of a man's nature and cling to him in his old age in spite of the cultivation of later years. But language lessons should not stop at the correction of language. They should teach also the proper use of the different parts of speech and the meaning of words. We do not mean the formal rules of grammar, nor the formal definitions of the dictionary, but by skillfully prepared and carefully graded oral exercises, practically illustrated, the child's vocabulary may be extended, and he may be taught to understand and to use English correctly. When to use is and when to use are, to distinguish between this and that, and these and those, I and me, who and which, slow and slowly, strong, stronger, and strongest, etc. The reading and the writing of script should be begun with the first reading lesson. Children in the primary classes are occupied but a small portion of the time in reciting, and it is absolutely necessary to employ the remainder of their time in school in some way that will interest as well as instruct them. In no other way can this time be employed to better advantage than by having the scholars copy on their slates or on the blackboard both the printed and written forms of the letters and words learned in their reading lessons, for in no other way will the characters be so indelibly stamped upon the minds of the children. To facilitate instruction in these writing lessons, we present on the 4 pages following the slate exercises, to be found on pages 61 of McGuffey's Revised Eclectic Primer. They will be found invaluable in this connection and are repeated here for the benefit of those teachers who for any reason do not wish to use the primer, and think it best to begin with the first reader. In these exercises, the small script letters are given in the order of their simplicity. They should be practiced as given in the copy, first separately and then in combination, forming a word. It is not intended that the class should be confined to the exercises presented in the book. As rapidly as new letters are introduced, the teacher should form new words and the exercises may then be multiplied at discretion. By the time a child has completed pages 14, 15, and 16, he should be familiar with all the small script letters, the capitals given alphabetically on page 17, and the script figures should be taught gradually according to the daily requirements of the reading lessons. The copies presented on these 4 pages may be used apart, if so desired, simply as writing lessons and to employ the unoccupied time of the children. But this work should by no means be allowed to interfere with the writing to be taught in connection with the reading lessons, which should be conducted as follows. Before beginning work, see that each child is provided with a slate properly ruled. It is important, too, that each child should have a long and neatly sharpened slate pencil, for it must be borne in mind that this slate work is preparatory to work in the copybooks, and it is very necessary that the first steps should be taken properly, and that no bad habits be formed. The child must be taught to hold a pencil in exactly the same way as he will be taught in future to hold a pen. This is an impossibility with a short pencil. Moreover, a short pencil invariably leads to the bad habit of cramping the hand, while a clumsy, blunt pencil can be expected to produce but clumsy work. An intelligent teacher will look carefully after just such points in order to produce the best results. Of course, too great precision in the form and slant of the letters, or in any of the fine points of writing, is not to be expected of very young children. Let details go unnoticed at first and be content with a careful correction of glaring faults in the position of the body and the limbs, in the manner of holding the pencil, etc. Little by little, one after another, the errors may be corrected and good habits formed. Thus, when work in the copybooks is commenced, tasks will prove easy and progress will be rapid. Give each child credit for effort, no matter how crude the first writing may be. The mere attempt at writing is meritorious, and it is very important that the child should not become discouraged at the outset. Begin the lesson in writing by putting on the blackboard, between a head and baseline, in large, well-formed script, the first word learned in the reading lesson, or the first letter taught by the phonic method, and let the children try to copy it on their slates. When this is fairly learned, take up the next word or letter, and so on, until the children can write all the words of the lesson. The children are supposed to learn the printed forms of these words in the reading lesson proper, and if thought best to do so, the printed forms may also be practiced on the slates, the children using their books to copy from. The teacher should explain that the script form means exactly the same thing as the printed forms, and should see that this is thoroughly clear to the pupils. Lest there should be confusion on this point, many teachers prefer to teach the writing of script only. With a little care, however, there need be no confusion, and practice on the printed form certainly aids to fix them in the child's memory. Care must be taken, however, to advance very slowly at first. Do not introduce the second word until the first is fairly learned. When all the words are learned, they should be combined, and a part of the reading lesson for each day should be written on the slates and then read aloud. The script exercises throughout the primer and readers are made up of only such words as have preceded them in print. They present no difficulties, therefore, except as exercises in writing and reading script. Let them be used as copies for slate work. As soon as the children have learned a sufficient number of words to make it practicable, have them compose sentences differing from those found in the book. The review lessons in the primer and readers are constructed entirely from words learned in preceding lessons, and the teacher can readily make others of a similar nature. At first, it will be necessary to dictate sentences for the children to write, or to put sentences on the board for them to copy, but in a short time the children will be able to compose their own sentences, and they should be encouraged to do this as early as possible, for children should be led to think for themselves and not merely to imitate. The illustrations of the readers should be used as the basis of object lessons, and short compositions should be written about them. Before giving a lesson of this kind to the class, have a talk with them about the picture that is to be the subject. The field is a wide one, but much depends upon the adroitness of the teacher in making suggestions and developing ideas so as to get all the good possible out of the lesson. Long experience shows conclusively that object lessons are of little or no value except in connection with writing. The two branches should therefore be taught in combination. Do not confine the object lessons to the reader illustrations. A collection of familiar objects such as pieces of metal, wood, and flowers, felt and leather, etc., should be made for use in this connection. Occasionally let the children select their own subjects for composition and what they see about them in the schoolroom. or at home, at churches, art galleries, or museums, or on their way to and from school. In short, let them write about whatever interests them. Interest is the mainspring of this form of study. Encourage it in every possible way. Stir up a healthful spirit of rivalry among the children as to who can see the most and describe it in the best manner. Do not be too strict as to precise forms, but stimulate freedom of expression. This exercise trains the observation, gives the child fluency in using the words he has learned, and is at the same time a drill in expression and grammar and in penmanship. The exercises should be begun as early as possible, that is, just as soon as a child, without forcing, can express an idea in its written form, and it should be continued throughout the school course. As a child takes up successively the studies of arithmetic, geography, history, grammar, and natural science, his mind develops and his ideas broaden. Nothing will assist this mental growth so materially as the practice of putting into written words the facts learned and the thought evolved. Geography, history, and science furnish an inexhaustible supply of interesting topics. Arithmetic develops logic, and grammar assists expression. Thus, composition is a sure index to the intelligent teacher of the mental development of the child. Whether he has profited by teaching and has acquired ideas, or simply words. In fine, there is no more important study in the common school curriculum than that of original composition. Unfortunately, there is no study which is more neglected. Spelling has to do with written language only. It bears the same relation to the written word that pronunciation does to the spoken word. And if there was no such thing as writing or printing, there would be no such thing as spelling. Spelling, then, is properly taught in connection with writing. If taught orally only, it is of but little use, and while children may appear to make rapid progress in this department and be able to spell difficult and unusual words in a manner wonderful to the casual visitor at the school, yet these difficult and unusual words are forgotten, as a rule, as soon as the drilling process is abandoned. Whereas the aim of spelling is so to drill the child that in his afterlife, when school days are over, he can write any word in his vocabulary instantly, without a doubt or a thought as to its spelling. If the writing lessons suggested are performed in connection with each day's reading lesson, the child unconsciously learns to spell each word by writing it over and over. And if the teacher does his duty in the careful correction of the object lessons and compositions of his class, there will be no need of formal spelling lessons in the first years of schoolwork. The spelling book has its proper place and a valuable one, but that place is not in primary classes. The practice of selecting words for spelling from the reader and exercises should be continued in all grades, even when the spelling book is used. Okay, so that was their overview of the auxiliary subjects for reading, right? So there was spelling, object lessons and composition, writing, I think they mean handwriting, and language lessons. Okay, so what stood out to me the most from this first chapter was, from the language lessons, was never allow a grammatical blunder to pass uncorrected, either in a child's speech or in his written exercises. That made me think of, I know I've heard that Charlotte Mason said that, don't ever let them see like a word written incorrectly or something. It makes me also think of my mom always correcting my grammar when I was a kid. Like she would I never, could say, when you're a kid, you say me when you should say I a lot. And I remember being corrected about that all the time. And I remember my mom telling me, though, that, people will judge you. People will think you're less intelligent than you are if you don't speak correctly. And so she was really on it to correct our grammar. So yeah, that's a great advantage we have as homeschool parents. We're with our kids all the time. And so we can be consistently correcting them on that stuff. Okay, next was, do not make the mistake of writing wrong forms on the board or elsewhere. Okay, yeah, we don't want them even to see it wrong. I get that confused. I know that I've read, quite a few things that are not, the American spelling of English. And so, like, I remember for the longest time, the word gray, I think we spell it Gray. They think other English speakers spell it EY. And to this day, I have to stop and be like, which one is it? Like, I have to think all the time because I've seen it both ways so many times that I can't remember which way is right. Like there's tons of words where we use a Z and other English speakers use an S, you know? Okay, but language lessons should not stop with the correction of language. They should teach also the proper use of the different parts of speech and the meaning of words. So, okay, so we do want to be actually teaching or presenting them with proper parts of speech. And by meaning of words, I'm thinking they mean like vocabulary more, like what different types of words mean. Probably things like there, and there, you know, things like that too. Okay, writing, what stood out to me? What stood out to me was that in the primer, they didn't even have the writing in their copybooks. They had them writing on slates. And I wonder if that's just because paper and stuff was more expensive back then. I wonder if that's why. Just because younger kids needed so much more practice and it was going to take up so much more paper. So they just had them do it on slates. But I'm not sure. I'm just wondering. Because they're telling them to hold it just like they would hold a regular pencil. It says, let details go unnoticed at first. Okay, so when talking about handwriting, they're saying, let details go unnoticed at first and be content with a careful correction of glaring faults in the position of the body and the limbs, in the manner of holding the pencil, etc. So they weren't so much focused on how perfect it looked, but they were looking at the child, like their posture. Like I always tell my kids, you know, how to hold their pencil, turn your paper so it lines up with your arm. Scoot up close to we work at a table, you know, table or desk. So that's a good pointer that when they're starting out learning how to write, to really focus in on getting them in the right position to set them up for success. I just made a note to myself though that I'm doing the primer right now with my youngest, and I have little slates. I'm like, that would be cute. He'd probably like that, but I don't have a slate pencil. Like I just have normal chalk, you know, but that might be fun though, especially for lessons that are taking him longer to master, to let him do some slate work on those days as well. And they were actually ruling their slates. And that's what this part is right here. But, okay, and of course, you know, give each child credit for effort. So they're trying to be positive. They don't want to discourage them like very early on. Lots of positive reinforcement. Okay, next for right said, care must be taken, however, to advance very slowly at first. Do not introduce the second word until the first is fairly learned. That's something I've never done. I always I did focus on the words first, right? But I always just did the whole lesson. So that's not how they intended when they were making these readers. When they were saying like only introduce one word at a time until they could read that word perfectly, I guess. And then before they move on to the next word. So you'd want to know all these words to be able to read them before they could actually read the whole passage. So that's interesting. It's something different than the way I've been doing it. Then, okay, so when all the words are learned, they should be combined, and a part of the reading lesson for each day should be written on the slates and then read aloud. They're doing copy work onto their slates. Okay, so on to object lessons and composition. So what stood out to me there was, as soon as the children have learned a sufficient number of words to make it practicable, have them compose sentences differing from those found in the book. So basically the same words, or enough words that they know to write their own little composition. So that's something too. They said I'm like, when should they do that, right? And they can do that based on the pictures in the books and stuff. So this is a composition that goes with this picture, but then they could write their own. And you guys could talk about it first. You could say, like, what do we see in here? Like, what kind of light? Like, what do we think it feels like? Do you think it's warm? Do we think it's cold? What are they doing? They're sewing. Like, do we know anything about sewing? Like, what tools do they need to sew? What kind of fabric do you think they're using? What do you think it feels like? Like they were saying, to actually have elements for them to touch and feel. They gave a little list of them. They were like, like a flower, like wood, a piece of leather, things like that, which I thought was interesting because they can feel those things and think of words maybe that they know that would go along with them. They're not giving any specific ages of like when to do these different things though. So I'm wondering when they would have started the primer back then. Like what was the age that they started? And I'm also wondering, like they said, so when you start having them do their own original short compositions, I mean, I think you could even just do sentences, But it said the exercises should be begun as early as possible. That is, just as soon as a child, without forcing, can express an idea in its written form. I said around 8. That's what I was thinking. I remember trying to have William writing sentences when he was, in second grade. He was 7. It really wasn't a real sentence on his own, right? Without using the scaffolding and, fill-ins and stuff like that. I would say he's 8.5 now, and I would say he is just now getting proficient at conveying his thoughts in words, writing them down. We've been working a lot on response questions, and he's still struggling with writing a complete sentence. He still answers questions, writes a phrase, right? A lot, an incomplete sentence. So I'm oh, it's not a complete sentence. So I think this is older than it's sounding. We're thinking this is right away, but I don't think it is. But I'm wondering what they were thinking. I'm going to Google it. I'm going to see if I can find the answer. I found this article called How Students Went Back to School in 1880. And they're saying, most kids were going to one-room schoolhouses back then. They would walk miles to get to school. There was one teacher, not much older than the students themselves, who would instruct each student in every grade at once. So Google says, by 1880, additional legislation stated that compulsory attendance at school ceased to be a matter for local option and now had to attend school between the ages of 5 and 10. It's hard to know when a child was even starting a primer, right? I'm gonna link to an article or webpage from the Westwood Historical Society. It says 1800 School Day Program. The original McGuffies were published in 1836. And my revised edition that this manual is referring to 1879. It says 1879, they're printed in 1896, 1907, and 1920. I'm assuming 1920 is when this set was produced. Okay, on to spelling. They say spelling then is properly taught in connection with writing. So they were kind of talking about oral drill and stuff. So I'm thinking I'm thinking of more spelling bee style, just getting kids to memorize how to spell words, and they were just saying them orally. So there's even back then when this was written, they were saying spelling needs to be connected to writing. They said there's no need of formal spelling lessons in the first years of schoolwork. They're probably wanting just to get them, reading and, forming letters and learning handwriting, I'm thinking. And the practice of selecting words for spelling from the readers and exercises should be continued in all grades, even when the spelling book is used. So even when they do start using their spelling book, they are still using these words. And I think they are using them. They're trying to make sure that the kids can spell these words too. Okay, if you have any thoughts or questions about that, leave me a comment and I will be back with chapter 2 or part 2 of the reading section called Methods of Teaching. Bye.